was a graduate from RISD, and she is not born in Texas, but grew up there, right?
Yes.
And her work is found in collections of the Guggenheim, the Whitney, San Francisco Museum of Art, Chicago, Cleveland, Houston, and several other collections like Tufts and RISD, et cetera, et cetera. There's been several books on her work, and she's been included in many group shows as well as solo shows. And we're very honored to have her speak about these works, particularly, which I happen to have written the introduction essay for the catalog, so I feel proprietary. I asked her to memorize it and just repeat it back, but she has her own relationship to her work. What's up with that, you know? Anyway, it's going to be a great treat to listen to, and of course, I'm sure she's going to invite questions as well, and we look forward to it. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Eric and April. So I have a microphone. It sounds so strange. Anyway, thank you for coming, and I'm so impressed. There's so many people, and it's very odd to see so many masks, which of course is a good thing, because I think there are people out there I know that I can't quite tell if I know. But at any rate, so Eric and April asked me to participate in this exhibition, and so there are 3 photographs hanging, and then there's one other we have brought from Eric and April's home, which was the photograph that was sort of the initiating photo of this body of work. I've been a photographer for a long time, 40-some years, and I like photo. I always wanted to be an artist. I knew I wanted to make something, and I decided that I really loved being out in the world. So as a younger person, I always loved painting, and I still to this day appreciate painting in a way that I always think is such a great art form. But I never wanted to be in a studio. I actually wanted to travel through the world. I wanted to literally travel and also just sort of touch the physical aspects of the world. So being a photographer with a camera going out in the world was what my artistic impetus has always been. Up until this body of work, which I started to make in around 2014, I've been mainly a black and white photographer. And the reason for that is I didn't want to just document what was out in the world. I wanted to use the physical aspect of the world to make photographs, but I wanted to somehow make it be visceral and sensual, and I wanted to abstract it in some way. So being a black and white photographer, which is what I've mainly been, offered me that sort of immediate abstraction from just documenting something that exists in real life. But I like the fact that the viewer knows or understands that my photographs are of real things that exist in the real world. I'm not a conceptual photographer. I didn't create anything. Everything's real. I didn't style it. I didn't, fix it. And that's in a way a very an unpopular way of working these days as an artist. I mean, so many photographers are doing conceptual works and with Photoshop and creating images. Nothing better or worse about either. I'm just very much a photographer of finding things in the world. So also, I don't necessarily have pre-planned bodies of work. I come across my bodies of work or how I want to work by moving through the world. So I'm going to tell you about this body of work, because this is a bit of a departure for me. Not only is it color, but it's really the first time I ever photographed objects that were not pretty much just nature or the natural world. Before this, I photographed a lot of water, river, mountains, oceans, caves, bugs, meadows, grasses, any kind of visceral, sensual nature. But this was a very specific departure in the sense that I was on a trip with my husband. We went to Sicily, and we were doing a kind of a cultural vacation. So we were looking at Greek ruins and Roman mosaics and going to the beach. And I had with me my camera, as I always do, because I'm always looking and always photographing. But I had a very specific day where my husband was in the hotel room taking a nap, and I went wandering around the old town of Syracuse with my camera, very classic, historic old town center. European Old Town Center, and it was a very windy, blue day like today, right now. Blue sky, a lot of wind, kind of cool. And there was just all this color overhead. Like I was walking through these narrow streets, but I kept seeing all this stuff up here. And suddenly, finally I sort of focused on what I was looking up above me, and it was people's laundry that were hanging on a very windy day. So what was happening was this sort of dance of fabric, and it was so beautiful and so interesting. And so I took a few pictures and sort of went back to the hotel, continued on the trip, came back to New York, looked at all the photographs I made during that trip, and decided that those particular images had so much sort of life and humanity in them, but they were snapshots, so it wasn't anything that was ready to go. But I thought it's compelling enough and so different from anything I'd ever done, because it was so much about color, that my husband said to me, I decided I would pursue it. And my husband said to me, just go right back there, like literally go back to Sicily, go back to that town, because you know it exists there, and go see what you can find. So I did, which is, again, very different from how I ever worked. So I went back to this place and immediately realized how difficult my job was, because the day that I had started this body of work happened to be a day with a lot of wind, a lot of laundry, and a lot of light. So I ended up looking, watching, waiting, just to see what laundry people would hang out. Because all of this is found work. I didn't hang my own laundry out, although I did try it at one point and it was a disaster. It's all found, it's all people's private life hung out in the public space, which I found such an interesting aspect of it. So when I started looking for it and thinking about it, I was interested in the humanity of it and in the idea of, here I'm seeing somebody's jeans hanging out. Who wears these jeans? Is it a young person, an older person? What do the rips in the jeans say about the person? So I started thinking about the body of work like a sort of anthropological, sociological project. Also, I included bits and pieces of buildings, like there were all these beautiful Baroque crumbling buildings, so I included them with the laundry. But as interesting as it all was, and as picturesque as it all was, it was too real, it was too straightforward to me. So I gradually eliminated all the context, eliminated the horizon line, because up until then, all of my photographs, and most photographs have a horizon line in them somewhere, even if it's not a literal horizon line, there's some sort of sense of where you're looking at eye level. So I started looking up. And so every picture that is here and in the body of work, everything is looking straight up. People always ask me, were you lying on the ground, etc. I was actually just standing, and I had a terrible neck ache by the end of the project, but I was just looking straight up. And I was in the street, so I never went in anybody's private spot, but I was always photographing laundry that people had hung out publicly, which is in itself, I think, a kind of fascinating thought, because here's somebody's underwear hanging out. So I sort of moved, the first inception of the project was thinking about it as a kind of human anthropological project, but then I quickly moved into looking at the abstraction of it, and that's where it became much more interesting to me. Because I looked at these objects that are quotidian, everyday, objects that we all have clothes, we all wash clothes, we might not hang our laundry out to dry, but we all deal with these objects. And suddenly they took on lives of their own. They looked to me like blooming flowers, like amoebas, like birds, like creatures. I thought of Moreau and Kandinsky paintings because of the kind of imagery they used. And I started making choices such as, I rarely have a cloud in the sky, which is a very conscious choice because it means that the sky, the literal sky, blue sky, is just a field. So it becomes sort of a painterly field, but it also becomes the sea. So I love this idea that it could be almost looking underwater. And I also eliminated any kind of external information. The only thing I included were the laundry lines. And as I say, this is all real. So for example, when I took the picture, there was probably a building on either side of that line, or there at least was a, something that anchored that line into the building. So many people always ask me, well, did you Photoshop these? What did you do to them? I use the camera as the compositional device. I use the frame of the camera to eliminate the extra information. And I ended up on this big quest then for different kinds of interesting laundry. So, for example, these are just somebody's, I guess, tea towels or dish towels. But I thought that, in particular, the day was had a slightly sort of milky sky. I mean, it's not clouds in the sky per se, but the kind of, I don't even know, what would you say, sort of diffuse light of the sky looked very painterly to me. And so I wandered around looking for laundry, waiting to see what people could hang out, what drew my attention. And then I saw these really kind of tattered dish towels that were so beautifully dancing in the wind. And I didn't necessarily take a lot of pictures of each situation. What I did was I simply waited. So I stood a lot, like for hours sometimes, because it became animated by the wind and it became animated in different ways. So I would wait and watch to see how the different fabric would move, and like I love what happens here. It looks like a flower at the top. And it's just how the clothes get bunched up by the wind. And also at one point I had taken some pictures that started looking too literal, and I kept thinking, why did the first batch didn't look so literal, the second batch looked more literal. My husband said, oh, but you have so many clothespins in the second batch. And I'm like, oh, right, all the clothespins. It's not like I put them there or took them out. They were just showing more because of the way the wind covers. I mean, there's clothespins in all these pictures, but the way the wind covers them up, it actually removes them a little bit from you understanding that it's a piece of hanging cloth. And I think if you, the viewer, don't have that as your first way of looking at it, then it allows you to go somewhere else in your mind about what these pictures, what they represent and how they work and how they move. So that was a kind of interesting, I mean, sometimes I use the clothespins to do a pattern or do a composition, but I started being conscious, for example, of looking for people that didn't hang too many clothespins. And sometimes people would hang clothespins in a very orderly way, so I like that as well. But for example, this, I felt like I'd hit the jackpot because I was walking and there was this sort of pink-red skirt with a pink-red clothesline. That was really there. They did that. And so I thought, oh, how great. And so, of course, with no wind, that was just a flat object hanging down. So I just watched it dance and watched it move around. And I kept relating to them like they were underwater creatures swimming. That was my big sort of reference point, even though I'm not trying to make you think that, but that was what I was thinking while I was photographing. I was trying to get at how can they be something other than what they are. At the same time, I really like that they're quotidian objects, that I felt like I was trying to make poetry out of something that's very everyday and very much a part of our life. The very first photograph that I thought worked was this picture right here. And it's some kind of polyester sheets, really. Oh, really? Okay. That was the picture I took where I thought, oh yes, okay. But it's but it's really, I mean, those are like really sort of hideous polyester, ugly. The color, I think they're hideous in a way in real life. Like, do you want those on your bed? But I just love the way the wind filled it. And then everyone always says that was like a shark fin, and it did. It looked like the fin of an underwater creature, and then this also. And I just love the way the color related in this picture. And of course, you do see there's a laundry line. There's a clothespin. Thank you, guys. So it became a project of trying to find something that would be, something that was unique and different, because at a certain point I kept finding the same kind of laundry over and over also. Like I photographed a lot in Sicily and there was an awful lot of black laundry. It was like a void. I wanted some brighter colors. And this picture, for example, the thing that attracted me to it when I saw it was not the skirt so much, but it was this knot. It's just someone tied the laundry line up with this kind of complicated knot. And then like going all over the place. So then that skirt was hanging just very slack, so I was really caught by that. My attention was caught by the knot, and then as the wind started blowing and the skirt started sort of emulating the shape of a knot. So I just stood there and took many, many pictures, thinking about it sort of like an octopus that was moving its legs, while this knot was taut in this one position. So I kept waiting for the wind to blow the skirt in a way that the skirt and the knot would relate to each other. Very hard to control. It was a little bit like looking for a needle in a haystack, because I'm used to photographing things that are pretty still. And so all these pictures were taken with things moving very fast. Yes, I used the fast shutter speed, so I really stilled the information in the picture, because I wanted it to be, I wanted the shape of the picture. But it's moving so fast that I'm not always seeing exactly what shape it's taking, which is sort of part of the adventure of being also photographing something that's moving and then looking at it after the fact. What else can I tell you? One other thing was, there's just something about that big, expansive blue field of sky. It expands because of the bright color, because it's open and there's nothing in the corners, and there's no, as I said, no clouds. There's a little bit of striation in that one. There's something that feels just like it's an immense world out there. And that was the feeling I was trying to get, this expansive feeling. When I originally had the first exhibition of this work, which was about 2017, I had a review in the New Yorker, and the writer Vincelletti titled the review, "The Sly Eroticism of Laundry on the Line," which I thought was so perfect, because I am literally looking up people's skirt. I mean, I am literally looking up. I have the photographs that were chosen for this show happen to have two skirts that are open, but that's a bit of a coincidence, because there are many other kinds of pictures. But it is looking up someone's skirt. I mean, it's literally looking up someone's skirt, someone that I don't know. And so also, you never look at the underside of people's clothing. I mean, that skirt is like, on the far right, it's got a lining, and it's got some color inside of it. Only the wearer would know that. So I like that. I like that sense that I was having sort of an intimate relationship with a person I didn't know. So even though I talk about these more as abstract images that don't necessarily talk about humanity, I do feel like I'm having a kind of communal relationship with a bunch of strangers. And this is the first time in my photographic career that I really photographed human objects in this way. After I did this body of work for a while and sort of came to the end of really my patience for having a terrible neck ache, waiting for people's laundry, and the search for laundry at a certain point, I ended up, again, at the recommendation of my husband. He said, "Why don't you try a kite festival?" So I did a body of work, which are not here, but I did do a body of work about kites in the sky, which are, again, fabric, lines, abstraction, similar elements. They are more, they're more known entities that go in the sky, as opposed to laundry. But it was a continuation of this body of work, and this is my little, I have a book called Heavenly Creatures, which I'm going to leave out for people to look at, but Heavenly Creatures is the title of the book. This body of work is called Ariel, and Heavenly Creatures refers to the kites and the laundry. I just thought of something else I wanted to say. Look at my note. So after I did this work, a lot of people would always say to me, "Oh, but you've always been a landscape photographer and you photograph nature, and now you're doing something so different." And at first I thought, yes, I am, because now I'm being a color photographer, etc. But in fact, it's not that different, in the sense that it's totally reliant on the wind, this thing you never see, which I think is conceptually really interesting. And also, it's really as much about clothing as it is about light and air. Because I chose days to photograph on very heightened light, very bright light. I couldn't have done any of these photographs without wind, and they would not have been interesting. In fact, I photographed a lot in Italy, where, of course, like many southern countries with a lot of sun, a lot of people hang their laundry out, and also electricity is very expensive, so a lot of people use the natural drying. But I always thought it was so picturesque, and it was beautiful to see all these flapping laundry lines, but it always just seemed like it just was pretty. It wasn't until I sort of got into this really started thinking about a wind and looking for a stiff wind, that I thought about how I was actually photographing this unseen force. I mean, this completely ordinary thing that we all experience all the time, wind, but we never look at it, we never really think about it. So a lot of the pictures to me also are an evocation of that kind of natural landscape. So, does anybody have a question? Or okay.
Was this photography limited to Italy? Was it just in Italy?
It's most of the. I did do it. I have like a picture from. This picture was in Croatia. I happened to be there for another purpose. I have some pictures I took in Cuba, but it was mainly Italy. But it wasn't really about Italy. It was just that I happened to go there a lot and be there.
I was thinking like if you could go to India or Morocco.
Yeah, right. I thought
the south of France.
I know it's endless. I know. Actually, no, I know, and I thought about it. In fact, I'd like to do like an Indian, because that's such an other, you know. I'm going.
What camera are you using to take these pictures?
I'm using a Sony, I don't know what it's called, R7. It's a, I guess it would be the equivalent of a 35 millimeter. It's a digital mirrorless camera.
Spectacular, beautiful work.
Thank you. April.
How did you arrive at the scale and size of this work?
Thank you for that question. That's a great question. So,
What's the question?
What's the question? Scale and size. How did I arrive at the scale and the size of the work? So, obviously, every artist, makes a decision about how to present the work in terms of scale and size. And in photography, you have a certain technical limitation often. But I wanted the pictures to envelop you. So I went through many different sizings, going bigger and bigger and bigger. At a certain time when they got too big, they felt like they were gonna, I don't know, they were scary creatures that were gonna envelop you. And so I settled on this size. This one was, I think, 40 inches, and these are 50 inches. I settled on these sizes as being the photographs that were enough out of scale of the real object and big enough to make you feel like it was big enough for you to look at standing back. Like if you stand way across the room and look at them, they just have a wonderful kind of abstract shape. You don't necessarily know what they are at all. But I landed on the size because I thought it really worked with the object, and also technically. There's always that issue, that when they start to go out of focus or not out of focus. Hi. You're next.
Having been someone who was lucky enough to attend that first show, a lot of people when they watched, or when they came through and they looked, could not tell if it was animals or if it was flowers, for example, in the poppy. Is that similar to the way it is with the kite work?
Yes.
Or could you tell?
I think you can tell more, because I think a kite you're used to. This is a slightly more out of context. I mean, laundry hangs outdoors, but somehow looking up, when you look up, kites are in the air, so you look up at a kite. Laundry you don't necessarily look up at. I mean, I'm literally, like the thing I photographed would be right there. So the kites, I think, have a little bit more of a known entity to them. But Eric?
Yeah.
You have to wait for the mic.
All right. Yeah, I actually have two questions. I think you just answered one of them.
Okay.
For some reason, when I saw these, I thought, I just imagined you laying on your back, looking up. But you say you stood there. So these were actually up quite high, and you were zooming in to capture them?
Yes. What I found after a lot of trial and error, the best situation was to photograph in these tight old cities of old medieval towns where the buildings were 2, 3, 4, and 5 stories high. And so the laundry would hang on those balconies. And then I got a zoom lens, I got a lens that allowed me to go between the lower balcony to the higher balcony, and I worked like that. If it got too much higher, I couldn't get to it. If it was too low, it was on top of me. So it really was dependent on those, that kind of, it's like a typical Roman apartment building size, 4 stories, 5 stories. That was like in Venice. Venice is a great place for laundry too, because they hang it up high. what's your second question?
My second question, you've used the word twice, picturesque. And I'd love to hear what you mean by picturesque and why you think that's either uninspired or a trap or something like that. Because I think a lot of artists deal with the same problem.
Right. Yeah, and I'm not sure picturesque is necessarily the best word, but I guess the answer would be that it's merely pretty, that it's something that doesn't have enough soul behind it. So, for example, the laundry that hangs flat against all the buildings in Venice that you see a million pictures of all the time. There's something very beautiful and sort of travel-loggy about it, but I think it doesn't transcend its subject matter. Whereas here I think, I mean, I'm trying, I think when the photographs are successful, it transcends what it is. It's not merely, like, I happen to think that skirt on the end is a really pretty skirt, but if it was just a depiction of the prettiness of that skirt, I don't think the photograph would be. But that's a really hard question, because sometimes, as artists know, you don't always know. I mean, sometimes you hope that the image is going to have a lot of life beyond just the initial visual impact of the image. I get very caught up sometimes in taking pictures that are of beautiful objects that are beautiful, but they don't necessarily go anywhere. So.
It seems like the abstraction of these, the thing that you're hit with the first time you look at them, and especially when we first saw the sharp one over there, which I have nicknamed it the sharp one. When I first saw that, I thought, I have never seen anything like this before in my life. What am I looking at? And then I thought, I really don't care. I hope I never find out. I just want to wallow in this weird abstraction that seems so familiar and so crazy. And I really had to be told it's laundry. And then it completely flipped me out that it had such a power within its own abstractions. And I think that landscape and abstraction are very, very related, because landscape is too big to really project adequately onto, so it lends itself to abstraction, and an abstraction of the mind that you have to greet it with in order to tame it to fit inside your head.
Wow, April.
I'm just trying to make this clear. It's not that
You're doing a good job.
So I think that these have that, and that's kind of why I asked the scale question. But I have one, following that up with a really dumb technical question.
Yeah.
If you had...
There is no dumb technical question.
Wait, just wait. If you were looking at your photographs, like your, I don't know what version of contact sheets are now.
Right.
If you were looking at a whole bunch of photographs that you'd taken, and there was one that was just perfect, except for this one bird that flew into the corner, would you not just clone it out in Photoshop?
Yes,
Please don't tell me that you make yourself throw away.
I'm not being a purist. I would, for sure. I would. I'm not being a purist. Actually, I'm like a terrible stylist. I'm a terrible whatever, setter-upper. I'm much better at taking a picture of stuff that exists. Apropos your question, definitely I'd take out a mar in the corner or whatever, or some bird that flew through the frame. Although it's probably too big. Because I had so much trouble finding laundry, I went to a place, I had a house in the country, and from the second story balcony, we put a laundry line up to a tree, and I hung laundry on it, and I went underneath it. It was the exact same situation, except it was my laundry, and I even borrowed some brightly colored clothing from people and hung it up. I took about 1 million pictures, and I didn't use one. They were terrible, because somehow I wasn't, I don't know, I couldn't set it up, I couldn't figure it out.
You touched a little at the beginning of your talk on being a person that wanted to go out and find the world.
I want to find
be
exactly.
in the world. And you didn't really adequately talk about how much of an explorer you are. You've always been a big world explorer. And I think that trying to tame the world and that spirit in these photographs is a really great achievement.
I don't like everything you're saying. I think you should my work, because I think that maybe that is the answer. In fact, maybe it's not just that I'm a bad setter-up or that I wanted to go. I really like looking. I like looking for this stuff and finding it. and you know, seeking out and seeing walking around the corner. No, I was in Venice, I walked around the corner and there were 5 pairs of jeans hung in a row, all individual on a line. But they all had something particular to them, like one had jewels on it, one had like torn knees. It was even hard to tell, you know, men or women, you know, what the gender, who wore it. And I just thought, how wonderful that is to come across that. It was like a little poem was given to me by the, you know, by I don't know, the nature, the gods or something out there. I have, I'll show you. This is, anyone is free to look at this later. This is a really hard thing to do, to just hold a picture up. But I was in Venice again with my husband, and he was ahead of me going around a corner, and then he went, "Oh gosh, you're gonna like this, wait till you see what's coming." And I don't know that it's my best picture, but I like it. I like the object, if I can find it. Sorry. Oh yeah. So I walked around a corner, and there was this picture. It was a sheet. It's like a sheet from a child's bed, this picture on the right. So it's like a sheet of stars and the moon, but it was full of light. So it was like a nighttime sheet in the daytime. And that was just it. That's what it looked like. It was just, I literally walked around, you know, an angle and went, oh, how fantastic. This is a picture of 3 kites on the other side. But I know this is too hard to see from a distance, so anyone is free to look at it later. But wait, you made me think of something else to say. I don't remember, but yes, Tom.
Hi, Sally. Can you hear me? Yes, so I've known your work for a long time, Sally. The one that sticks most in my mind and most frequently is it's a sailboat on this vast expanse of flat water that you're looking at from a very far vantage point. That's my first favorite. My second favorite are the interiors of stone canyons that you are also looking at from a little closer, but you're still looking at it. Those pictures, you put the viewer in a totally different place with those pictures. It's a different way of seeing it, of reacting to it. This one I'm not sure about, but those two, the other two that you have to look at from a vantage point that is distant, but yet it's very close. You're playing with the perspective of how we look at things.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. Yes, I am. And I just want to add, both of you made me think of it, but when I first was doing the body of work, when I print big prints, I print in a communal lab with other people, just because I don't own the machine and it's expensive, et cetera. But all these people kept saying to me, "What is that?" Somebody said, somebody said, "Is that vegetables hanging?" I'm like, "Vegetables?" So, I mean, this guy, I didn't even know. I mean, he had a whole thing about vegetables, and he showed me the outlines of it. It was like somebody's underwear, and he thought they were vegetables. I thought, okay, I'm going to kind of go with this notion that people... So I was actually surprised that I took the picture, so I know the vantage point, but I was surprised by how it became very interesting to me that simply because I was looking up, which is a vantage point that most people don't look at this kind of information from, it really changed, eliminated the horizon line, basically, so it really changed the way people responded to it and thought about it. But every question I get from most people all the time is asking me, did I Photoshop it, did I add it, did I put the lines in, did I do this, do I do that? I really didn't, except for the bird that flew through, but I mean,